I've been debating whether to tell this story, but honestly, I need to get it off my chest. My name is Liam. I'm 20, and for the past couple of years, my life has been nothing but work, stress, and exhaustion. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, in a house that looks picture perfect from the outside. Inside, it's a different story. My father, Daniel, runs our family's bakery well. Technically, he manages it. I'm the one doing most of the work. I have two younger siblings, Sophia 17 and Ethan 14. They don't lift a finger, ever. If there's something that needs to be done, whether it's cleaning, baking, or closing up shop, it's always on me. It's been this way since I was a kid. Every morning, I wake up early for my shift at the bakery. I mix dough, restock shelves, handle customers. Then, after a full workday, I come home, exhausted, only to find more chores waiting. Dishes piled up, crumbs on the floor, tables left a mess. And guess who's expected to clean it all up? Not Sophia, not Ethan, me. It's like an unspoken rule in the house. Liam handles everything. Dad says I need to set an example as the oldest. But honestly, I'm just done. The worst part? They don't even pretend to appreciate it. I could be on my feet for hours, covered in flour, running deliveries, and my dad still finds something to criticize. Meanwhile, Sophia and Ethan are glued to their phones, probably watching TikToks or texting their friends, completely unbothered. Last Thursday was the last straw. I had just gotten off a brutal 9-hour shift. My hands were sore, my head was pounding, and I hadn't eaten all day. All I wanted was 5 minutes to sit down. But the second I stepped into the house, the smell hit me: stale pastries, spilled coffee, and something burnt. And there, in the middle of the table, was Ethan's dirty plate, crumbs everywhere. I clenched my jaw. Not today. Before I could even take a breath, I heard my dad's voice from the kitchen. Liam, clean the table. Ethan left his plate again. Just like that, the frustration that had been simmering for years reached its boiling point. I wasn't going to do it. Not this time. I stood there, staring at the plate like it was the final straw holding my patience together. My muscles ached from working all day at the bakery. And yet, here I was, expected to clean up after Ethan again. From the kitchen, my dad, Daniel, called out in that same dismissive tone he always used. Liam, don't make a big deal out of this. Just clean it up. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. No. A moment of silence. I could hear the clatter of dishes as Daniel stopped what he was doing. What did you say? His voice was sharper now, the edge of authority creeping in. I walked into the kitchen, hands clenched at my sides. I said, no, Dad, I'm not doing it. I just got off a 9-hour shift at our bakery, where, by the way, I do more than anyone else. And now you expect me to come home and keep working? Daniel scoffed. You're the oldest. It's your responsibility. There it was again. Responsibility. My entire life had been built around that word, but apparently it only applied to me. Sophia was sitting on the couch, headphones in, scrolling through her phone. Ethan was playing a game, completely unfazed by the argument happening right in front of him. I gestured toward them. And what about them? When do they start taking responsibility? Daniel sighed like I was exhausting him. Sophia and Ethan have school. They're too young to worry about all this. I let out a bitter laugh. Dad, I had school too. And guess what? I was still working at the bakery before and after class. Nobody ever said I was too young. He waved a hand dismissively. You're overreacting, Liam. Just clean up and stop acting like a child. That was it. The final push. I felt something snap inside me, like a dam breaking after years of holding back frustration. I'm done. Daniel frowned. What do you mean you're done? I mean, I'm done with this. I'm done being the only one who does anything. I'm done coming home just to be treated like a free laborer. And I'm definitely done being told that I should just accept it. Sophia finally looked up from her phone, eyes wide. Ethan paused his game. Daniel's face darkened. Liam, you're being ridiculous. I grabbed my car keys off the counter. No, Dad. What's ridiculous is expecting me to give up my entire life to run your bakery while Sophia and Ethan do nothing. I've been saving up, and I don't need this anymore. Daniel took a step forward, his voice rising. Where the hell do you think you're going? I exhaled sharply. Anywhere but here. Before he could say another word, I turned and walked out the door. For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't have a plan. I just drove. The familiar streets of my neighborhood blurred past as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. My heart was still pounding from the argument. The last thing I saw before stepping out was the stunned expression on my dad's face, like he never imagined I'd actually leave. Neither did I. But there I was, driving aimlessly through the city, my phone buzzing every few minutes. I ignored it. I knew exactly who it was. I pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe, parking in the farthest corner. The engine hummed quietly as I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes. A deep, exhausted breath left my chest. What now? I had savings. Months of working nonstop at the bakery had at least given me that. But I hadn't planned to move out yet. I wanted to have more time, more money, a more solid plan. But I also knew that if I went back now, I'd never leave. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through apartment listings. Most were out of my price range, but after a few calls, I found something. A tiny one-bedroom apartment on the quieter side of the city. A little expensive, but manageable. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. By the next afternoon, I had signed the lease. Moving was surreal. I packed only what I needed: clothes, some personal things, my work gear. Everything else, I left it. The house, the bakery, the weight of their expectations. I was leaving it all behind. When I first stepped into my new place, I just stood there, taking it in. It was small, sure, but it was empty in the best way possible. No mess to clean up. No orders barked at me. No one expecting me to handle everything. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The first night was weird. It was too quiet. No background noise from the TV blaring in the living room. No dishes clinking in the kitchen. No passive-aggressive sighs from my dad. Just silence. And it was beautiful. I spent the first few days settling in. My routine was simple: work, gym, come home, do nothing if I wanted to. No one was waiting for me to clean, to cook, to take care of things. If I wanted to leave my dishes in the sink, I could. Not that I did. I liked the place being clean, but now it was my choice. For the first time in forever, my time belonged to me. Then the calls started. At first, just one voicemail. My dad. Liam, you need to come back. The bakery is a mess, and your mother is struggling to keep up. Sophia and Ethan don't know how to do anything, and we need you here. I rolled my eyes and deleted it. The next day, a text from Ethan. Dude, Mom says you need to stop being selfish and come back. The house is disgusting. No one's done laundry, and we're out of food. I stared at the screen, shaking my head. Unbelievable. They weren't asking if I was okay. They weren't wondering how I was handling things. They just wanted me to come back to clean up their mess. I ignored it. Then Sophia texted, Liam, come on. This is getting ridiculous. You're really gonna let the whole family fall apart over some chores? Just come back and help for a bit. I put my phone down and laughed. Actually laughed. Over some chores? That's what they thought this was about? I had spent years working my ass off for them, and they thought I was being petty about a couple of dirty dishes. I let the messages pile up. The next few days, the guilt tripping escalated. My mom texted, then called, leaving voicemails filled with fake concern. Liam, honey, please come home. Your father is so stressed. We need you. Just for a little while. A few hours later, this is breaking your father's heart. You're being unfair. You should be grateful you had a home with us. Then finally, if you don't come back, don't expect us to be there for you when you need us. I stared at that last message for a long time. There it was, their real feelings. It had never been about me. It was about what I could do for them, I wasn't their son. I was their unpaid worker. And now that I was gone, they didn't know how to function. Good. I put my phone on silent and went to bed. They could figure it out themselves. I thought ignoring them would make them stop, that they'd get the message, and finally realize I wasn't coming back. I was wrong. The messages didn't slow down, they got worse. At first, it was just my dad and siblings, throwing guilt trips my way like it was my job to fix their problems. But when I kept ignoring them, my mom started calling. She never called. Not when I was busting my ass at the bakery. Not when I was practically raising my siblings. Not even when I got sick and still had to work because the bakery can't run itself. But now? Now, she needed to talk. The first voicemail was calm, almost too calm. Liam, sweetheart, I know you're upset, but let's be reasonable. You can't just abandon your family. We need to talk. Call me back. I didn't. The next one came a few hours later, her tone sharper. You need to stop acting like a child and come home. Your father is exhausted. The house is a disaster, and Sophia and Ethan are completely helpless without you. And that was supposed to make me want to come back? I deleted it. The texts kept coming. Dad, Liam, enough. You've made your point. Now come home. Ethan, dude, seriously, grow up and stop punishing us. Sophia, Mom's crying. You happy now? I rubbed my temples, feeling my blood pressure rise. Punishing them? I wasn't punishing anyone. I was finally choosing myself. But of course, they didn't see it that way. In their eyes, I wasn't a person. I was a function, a worker, the one who made things run smoothly. And now that I wasn't there, everything was falling apart. Not once had any of them asked how I was doing. Not once had they acknowledged what they put me through. It was all about them. But the worst came late that night. I'd just finished dinner when my phone rang. Dad. I stared at it for a moment before sighing and picking up. Might as well get this over with. Liam. His voice was firm, controlled, like he was trying to sound reasonable. This has gone far enough. I leaned against the counter. What has? This little stunt of yours. I rolled my eyes. Right. The stunt where I decide I don't want to be treated like a servant anymore. He sighed like I was exhausting him. You're blowing this out of proportion. You had responsibilities. We all make sacrifices for family. I felt something hot and bitter rise in my chest. Oh, so it's a sacrifice now? Funny, because when I was working at the bakery before and after school, cleaning up after everyone, and running the house while you sat on your ass, no one called it a sacrifice. You just expected it. Watch your tone. Or what? I snapped. You'll ground me? Take away my phone? Newsflash. Dad, I'm not under your control anymore. Silence. I could hear him breathing. Could feel the frustration radiating through the phone. You're being incredibly selfish. I laughed. Selfish? That's rich. Coming from the guy who's mad because his free labor quit. His voice turned cold. Fine. If you want to throw your family away, then don't come crawling back when you realize you made a mistake. I clenched my jaw. You know what, Dad? I won't. And I hung up. The silence after that call was different. For the first time, I felt free. No more guilt tripping. No more obligations. No more pretending like I owed them my life just because I was the oldest. But of course they weren't done. A few days later, I got a text from Sophia. Are you really never coming back? I hesitated before replying. Not to be your maid, no. Her response came quick. That's not fair. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, what's not fair is that I spent years doing everything while you and Ethan did nothing. What's not fair is that Dad expected me to run the bakery and the house, while you guys got to have a normal childhood. What's not fair is that, now that I've finally left, none of you care about how I feel, you just care that no one's cleaning up after you anymore. She left me on read. I sighed, setting my phone down. I wasn't going back. Not now. Not ever. I knew they weren't done with me. The silence didn't last long. A few days passed without a call, without a guilt-tripping text, and for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally given up. Then my phone buzzed. Dad, this is getting out of hand, Liam. We need to talk. Come home. I stared at the screen. My hands tightened around the phone. Come home. Not how are you. Not we miss you. Just a demand. Just an order. I could have ignored it. I should have ignored it. But something inside me knew this wasn't over until I said it was. So I made a decision. I was going back, but not for them. For me. Not to fix things. Not to clean up. Not to be guilted into coming back. I was going to end this. The drive to my parents' house felt strange. The roads were familiar, but they didn't feel like mine anymore. The house I had spent my entire life in no longer felt like home. It was just a place I used to be trapped in. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and took a deep breath. This was it. When I walked through the front door, the first thing that hit me was the smell of stale bread, something slightly burnt, and a lingering scent of unwashed dishes. The house looked different. Not in any big way, but in the little things. Crumbs on the table, piles of laundry in the hallway, the sink overflowing with dishes. It was a mess. And for the first time in years, it wasn't my problem. I stepped into the kitchen, and there they were, Dad, Mom, Sophia, and Ethan. All of them sitting around the table waiting for me. Their faces lit up for a second, like they actually thought I was back for good. I let them sit with that hope for just a moment before I said the words that shattered it. I'm not staying. Silence. Mom's smile faltered. Liam, honey, no. My voice was steady, firm. I'm here to say what I should have said a long time ago. Dad's expression hardened. Don't start with this nonsense again. You've had your tantrum now. Come back and do your part. I let out a short, humorless laugh. My part? My part was doing everything, while everyone else did nothing. My part was running the bakery, running the house, while you sat back and let me. I'm not playing that role anymore. Ethan scoffed, leaning back in his chair. Dude, it's just chores. You're making it a bigger deal than it is. I turned to him, shaking my head. No, it's not just chores. It's the fact that none of you ever saw me as part of this family. You saw me as a worker. The second I left, you didn't ask if I was okay. You didn't ask if I was happy. You just wanted me back to take care of things. That's not love. That's convenience. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, looking away. That's not true. I crossed my arms. Then tell me, Sophia, what's the last nice thing any of you did for me? When's the last time Dad thanked me for running the bakery? When's the last time Mom checked in on me instead of just giving me another task? When's the last time either of you did something to help without being asked? No one answered. Mom sighed, rubbing her temples. Liam, you're being dramatic. Families help each other. I nodded. Yeah, they do. But this wasn't helping. Helping is when it's shared. Helping is when it goes both ways. What you did to me was using. Dad slammed his hand on the table, his patience snapping. Enough. You're coming back. End of discussion. I met his glare without flinching. No, I'm not. His nostrils flared. Liam, you don't get to order me around anymore. My voice was calm, but firm. You don't own me. I am not your worker. I am not your backup plan. And I am not your responsibility anymore. His jaw clenched. But I wasn't done. I gestured around the kitchen. This? The mess? The chaos? This is your life now. Figure it out. You're all perfectly capable of handling it, you just never had to, because I was always here. But I'm not anymore. Mom's voice cracked. Liam, please. We need you. I exhaled sharply. No. You need someone to take care of you. And that's not my job anymore. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Then I turned, walking toward the door. No one stopped me. No one called after me. For the first time, they finally understood. I wasn't coming back. I walked out of that house feeling lighter than I ever had before. As I drove back to my apartment, I realized something I had spent so many years carrying the weight of their expectations, their demands, their burdens. And now, I was free. For the first time, my life was mine, and I wasn't looking back. Story 2. I never thought my own brother would be the one to stab me in the back. I mean, I always knew we weren't close, Daniel, and I had been opposites since childhood, but what he did? That was a whole new level of betrayal. I'm Maddie, 34, a single mom to 2 amazing kids, Liam, who's 8, and Emma, who just turned 5. Life hasn't exactly been a walk in the park, but I've worked my ass off to give them a happy, stable home. My brother Daniel, on the other hand, is 37, married to Sarah, and lives in a world that looks perfect on the outside: big house, well-mannered kids, a stay-at-home wife, and a 6-figure corporate job that he never shuts up about. But perfection? It's an illusion. Daniel was always the golden child. The straight A student, the rule follower, the one who made our parents proud, while I was the rebellious, difficult one. He loved to rub it in my face. 2. Like leaving his test papers lying around with big, red A+ marks just so I'd see them. As adults, it only got worse. His advice was just thinly veiled criticism, like when I became a freelance graphic designer, and he said it was a hobby job that set a bad example for my kids. Or when Liam chose dance over soccer, and Daniel acted like I was dooming him to a lifetime of bullying. The worst? When he asked if I was saving for therapy because Emma's favorite color was black instead of pink. Classic Daniel. The breaking point came at a family barbecue. We were all at my parents' place, the kids running around the yard having fun. Everything was fine until Daniel made one of his comments loud enough for everyone to hear. No wonder your kids don't listen to anyone, Maddie. You let them run wild. I could feel my mom stiffen. My dad suddenly got really into flipping burgers. And Sarah? She just sat there, sipping her lemonade, probably mentally comparing my parenting to the color-coded chore charts and strict screen time schedules she had for her kids. Daniel and Sarah are those parents. No sugar, no staying up past 7:30, no TV, unless it's educational. Their kids have schedules down to the minute, and they always look exhausted. Meanwhile, Daniel acts like fatherhood is just another side gig. He's either on his phone or barking orders. But sure, I'm the bad parent. I laughed it off at the time. I've learned not to take the bait. But what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. A week later, my mom called me, her voice tight with discomfort. Honey, I don't want to alarm you, but I heard something from Aunt Linda. Daniel's been saying some awful things about you. Apparently, he'd been telling extended family that I was an unfit parent, that I was too lenient, and that my unstable lifestyle would ruin my kids. He even hinted that someone should call Child Protective Services, just to step in before it's too late. I was stunned. I mean, we had our issues, but this was low, even for him. And then, a few days later, my worst nightmare happened. A knock at the door. I opened it, and there they were, 2 CPS workers standing on my porch. We received an anonymous report about unsafe living conditions and possible neglect. I felt like my stomach hit the floor. My hands shook as I let them in. They were polite but thorough, checking the fridge, looking at the kids' rooms, asking about their schedules, their diet, their schooling. They even talked to Liam and Emma, who were confused but cooperative. After an hour, they assured me that everything looked fine, and they'd be closing the case. But the damage was done. I was shaken to my core, and I knew exactly who was behind it. At the next family gathering, I confronted Daniel. I didn't come out swinging. I wanted to see if he'd own it. Hey, Daniel, I said, keeping my tone casual. You wouldn't happen to know anything about a CPS report against me, would you? His smirk told me everything. People just want what's best for the kids, Maddie. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see the bigger picture. I saw red. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call him out right then and there. But instead, I forced myself to breathe. My parents were furious when they found out, but they still refused to cut him off. Family is family, they said. Sarah stood by Daniel, of course, claiming that they were only concerned about my kids, because I was too selfish to put them first. That's when I knew I couldn't trust them, so I started keeping track of everything. I wrote down every passive-aggressive comment Daniel made, every look Sarah gave me, and, more importantly, I started paying attention to their kids. At every family event, they seemed more withdrawn, less playful, more on edge. I didn't know where this was heading, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Daniel and Sarah get away with this. And soon enough, cracks in their perfect little world started to show. After that CPS stunt, I knew I had to play it smart. Daniel had already proven he was willing to take things to extremes, and if I made the wrong move, he'd just twist it into more ammo against me. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I waited. I watched. I took notes. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized something was seriously wrong in Daniel's house. It started small things I'd never bothered to notice before. His kids, Max 10 and Lily 7, always looked exhausted at family events. At first, I figured it was just their strict schedules, no sugar, no TV, everything planned to the second. But then I started watching more closely. Max flinched when Daniel raised his voice, even if it wasn't directed at him. Lily barely spoke unless someone directly asked her a question. When the kids played with mine, they never really let loose. It was like they were always waiting for something to go wrong. The real confirmation came from an unexpected source, Sarah's old best friend Jen. Jen and I hadn't spoken in years, but one night I got a message out of the blue. She started with, "Hey, I know this is random, but is everything okay with you?" Now, normally, I'd assume this was just small talk, but something about it felt off. I asked her what she meant, and that's when she dropped a bombshell. Apparently, Sarah had been venting in private online forums about her marriage. She wasn't just struggling with Daniel's controlling parenting, she was miserable. Jen told me that, in some of these posts, Sarah talked about how Daniel micromanaged everything, from the kids' meals, to their bedtime routines, to the way she folded the laundry. He controlled the finances completely. Sarah didn't even have access to their main bank account. And the worst part? She admitted that, sometimes, she felt more like one of his children than his wife. That was a lot to take in. Jen didn't have screenshots, but she suggested I check Daniel and Sarah's social media accounts. And oh boy, did I go down the rabbit hole that night? Daniel's page was exactly what you'd expect: polished, staged photos of their perfect family, smiling kids, matching outfits, carefully worded captions about how blessed he was. But once I really looked, I started seeing the cracks. Sarah never looked relaxed in any of the pictures. Her smiles were tight, her body language stiff. And the kids? They weren't grinning like kids do when they're genuinely happy. They were posing like they knew they had to perform. And then there were Sarah's comments. Another busy week, but we made it through. So proud of how well the kids handle their schedules. Just gotta keep pushing forward. At first glance, they seemed normal. But knowing what I knew now, it was like she was convincing herself that things were fine. Then came the real turning point: another family gathering. Another backyard BBQ at our parents' place. This time, I paid extra attention. Max and Lily were quieter than ever. Lily kept yawning. Max was so zoned out, he barely reacted when Liam tried to get him to play tag. And then, when Daniel snapped at him for spilling a little bit of juice, Max flinched. Not like a normal "oops, I'm in trouble" reaction, this was fear. And Sarah? She let out this little sigh so quiet I almost didn't catch it, before immediately plastering on a smile, like nothing had happened. That's when I knew for sure. Daniel wasn't just a strict parent. He was controlling, borderline abusive, and the kids were paying the price. After the BBQ, I reached out to a mutual acquaintance who worked at Max's school. I wasn't expecting much. I knew teachers couldn't just give out information, but I framed it as concern for my nephew's well-being. And what she told me? It lined up way too well with what I'd been noticing. She didn't give me details, but she did say that one of Daniel's kids had been showing signs of serious anxiety. A teacher had even expressed concerns about the pressure they were under. That sealed it. I didn't just want to take Daniel down anymore. I needed to, but I couldn't be reckless. Reporting him to CPS without enough evidence would just backfire. And I knew Daniel would make my life hell if he even suspected I was behind it. So I kept watching, kept listening, kept documenting. And Daniel, he must have felt the shift because he started ramping up his attacks. At the next family dinner, I had one glass of wine, just one. And yet, Daniel took the opportunity to loudly joke about how I always had a drink in my hand. He even laughed about how I might be the resident lush of the family. It was bullshit. And it wasn't just an insult, it was a setup. He was laying the groundwork to make me seem like an unstable, unfit mother. That's when I knew I had to start fighting back. I started looking into custody laws, researching what legally counts as neglect or emotional abuse. I made sure every little thing Daniel said or did was written down with dates. And I wasn't the only one noticing things anymore. At the next family event, my cousin pulled me aside. "I don't want to get in the middle of this," she said, voice low. "But I think you might be right about Daniel." Turns out she'd been noticing it too. The way his kids never relaxed. The way Sarah seemed scared to contradict him. But the real moment that made my blood run cold? Jessica, yes. Sarah herself sent me a text. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for Daniel's behavior. That was unnecessary." It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged it. But before I could even respond, she immediately backtracked. "Forget I said anything. I shouldn't have texted you. Just ignore this." She was scared. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about proving a point anymore. Daniel's kids needed help. And I was going to make damn sure they got it. I knew Daniel would see me as a threat if I wasn't careful. He had spent his whole life controlling the narrative, making sure everyone believed he was the perfect son, husband, and father. If I pushed too hard, too fast, he'd find a way to turn it against me. So I played it smart. First, I started gathering more evidence. Not just what I saw, but things I could actually use. I kept notes on every comment, every look, every moment of tension that passed between Sarah and the kids. I saved screenshots of Sarah's social media posts, the ones where she tried so hard to sound like everything was fine but just wasn't. And then I got really lucky. One afternoon, Sarah needed help picking up the kids from school, and I volunteered. She hesitated at first, probably worried about what Daniel would say, but eventually, she agreed. That's when I heard Max talking to one of his friends. "I had to skip lunch," he muttered, keeping his voice low. "Dad says I'm getting chubby." I swear, my heart stopped. I looked at Sarah, hoping she'd correct it, say something like, "That's not true, sweetheart." But she just sighed and rubbed her temple, like this was something she'd heard 1,000 times. Later, when I gently asked her about it, she admitted Daniel had been obsessing over the kids' weight. He'd cut out all snacks from the house, lectured them about portion sizes, even told them they weren't allowed seconds at dinner. I had heard enough. That night, I filed an anonymous report with CPS. I kept it factual, no exaggerations, no speculation. I focused on the kids, their anxiety, their exhaustion, the food control. I listed everything I'd gathered, every piece of evidence that pointed to a toxic home environment. And then I waited. A few weeks later, Daniel got a surprise visit from CPS. And this time, it wasn't because of me. One of Max's teachers had also filed a report. Apparently, Max had been crying during class, saying he didn't want to go home. I didn't know that part until later. But when I heard, I felt sick. Daniel was furious. He started pointing fingers at everyone. He even accused our own parents of conspiring against him. The paranoia was eating him alive, and the more he lashed out, the more people started seeing who he really was. Then, out of nowhere, Sarah showed up at my house. She looked different. Not just exhausted, but defeated. And for the first time, she admitted everything. Daniel didn't just yell at the kids. He yelled at her. every day, over everything. He controlled the bank accounts, made her ask permission to spend their money, criticized how she cleaned, how she dressed, even how she breathed sometimes. "I feel like I don't even exist anymore," she whispered. "Like, I'm just here to make his life easier." I had never liked Sarah, but in that moment, I felt for her. She wasn't just a strict mom, she was trapped. And for the first time, she was thinking about leaving him. I helped her make a plan. First, we set up a separate bank account in her name, something Daniel wouldn't know about. Then, I put her in touch with a lawyer one who specialized in helping women leave controlling marriages. And through it all, I kept my mouth shut around Daniel. I let him think he was still in control, until the moment he lost it completely. At another family dinner, in front of everyone, Max spilled his drink. Not a big deal, just a few drops of juice on the table. But Daniel? He snapped. He slammed his hand on the table so hard the plates rattled. "For God's sake, Max, can't you do anything right?" Max flinched so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. Lily went stiff, staring at her plate. Sarah looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. And the rest of the room? Dead, silent. My parents looked horrified. My cousin, the same one who'd quietly backed me up before, had actual tears in her eyes. Daniel realized too late what he had just done. Sarah didn't say a word. She just stood up, took the kids, and walked out. The next morning, she filed for divorce. Daniel lost his mind. First, he tried to lock her out of their bank accounts, but she was already one step ahead. Then, he started calling everyone our parents, mutual friends, trying to paint himself as the victim. "She's brainwashed," he said. Maddie got to her. But by that point, nobody was buying it. The legal process wrecked him. Sarah's lawyer came prepared. They had screenshots, text messages, even CPS reports showing emotional neglect. And when Max and Lily were interviewed, they made it clear they wanted to live with their mom. Daniel tried to fight. He even went after me, accusing me of destroying his family out of jealousy. He tried digging up anything from my past that could discredit me. But all it did was make him look desperate. And in the end, the judge saw through it. Sarah got full custody. Daniel only got supervised visitation, and he had to take anger management classes before he could even think about unsupervised time with the kids. That ruling, it broke him. After that, his life fell apart. He had to downsize, sold his fancy car, moved into a smaller place. His reputation shattered. He tried rebuilding his image online, posting those hashtag best date ever pictures with the kids. But people weren't fooled anymore. And Sarah, she thrived. She got a part-time job, started making friends again. For the first time in years, she had control over her own life. The kids changed too. Lily became more talkative. Max started smiling again. Therapy helped, and over time, they started to heal. And me? Well, I finally got my peace. Daniel tried, one last time, to make amends. He pulled me aside at a family event, trying to offer some half-assed apology. "I guess I went too far," he muttered. I looked him in the eye and said, "You almost ruined my life, Daniel. And you did ruin Sarah's and the kids. No apology is gonna fix that." And then I walked away. For the first time in my life, I was done with him. No second chances, no forgiveness, just freedom. For me, for Sarah, and, most importantly, for Max and Lily.